Welcome to One Symphony, a podcast that explores classical music's relevance in our modern lives. I'm Conductor Devin Patrick Hughes, and I'm here to share with you stories and conversations with musicians, composers, and artistic entrepreneurs that aim to unite us into one symphonic world. American pianist Clayton Stephenson's love for music is immediately apparent in his joyous charisma on stage, expressive power, and natural ease at the instrument. Hailed for extraordinary narrative and poetic gifts and interpretations that are fresh, incisive, and characterfully alive by Gramophone, he is committed to making an impact on the world through his music making. Clayton, I'm really excited to have you on One Symphony today. It seems the more I learn about your upbringing, it seems that music saved you. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say so. I think more specifically, I think certain songs that I've discovered throughout my life have been very important in, keeping my mental strong or helping me empathize with the situation that I'm in or seeing the bigger picture. So, yeah, I would say so.
And can you maybe talk a little bit about your connection to music, maybe classical music or other genres, and maybe how the piano kind of entered your life little by little?
I don't think playing piano was a conscious decision in terms of a career path, but, I think my mom kind of used it as, time away from me just to relax as a single mom. And, I think I developed a love for it because my first teacher was quite special and she didn't teach me, the usual way, with scales and etudes and stuff like that. But she let me play pieces that I really enjoyed. And so I think I developed a love for the music before having the facilities to play it. And I think from there, it was just developing more and more. I went to the Juilliard MAP program, and that was the first time I entered Juilliard. And being there, it was quite amazing to see, pre-college kids who are, maybe a couple years older than me, playing these full length piano recitals. And so I would sit there hour after hour, listening to them play. And I really wanted to get into Juilliard Free College. And at that point, the MAP program, it's a, an outreach program. Nobody had ever gotten from there and jumped up to the pre-college program before. And so even the administration was pretty discouraging. And they were like, that's not what this program is intended for. But my teacher there, another great teacher, Miss Nam, she fully supported me, believed in me. The first year I tried, I didn't get in. Second year I tried again, and luckily I got in. And so at 10 years old, I got into the Juilliard Pre-College program. And throughout that whole time, she was giving me extra lessons free of charge, all that. And so, quite grateful. And from there, I got into Juilliard Pre-College, which was a whole nother scene. I entered pre-college not really being able to read music. I sort of faked it. And what I meant is that I would learn things by ear. And I remember there was an audition for this Chinese teacher in Flushing. And I played the first movement of a Haydn sonata. And he's like, great, let's see your sight reading skills. So, look at the sight read the second movement. And I was like, oh, I already know this second movement. So I, was like faking sight reading it. He was like, oh, you know this a little too well. Let me turn to something else. And he turned to another sonata, and I just could not sight read anything. And he was like, oh, you don't know how to read music. So he pulled out those flashcards that you have, just like, what is this? A G, what is this? And I couldn't answer any of those. So it was interesting, and it was quite a lot of work to just at that point, because everybody else had been traditionally trained and could read. It was a lot of work just bringing and preparing repertoire for my teacher every week when I couldn't sight read. So yeah, there was a lot of things that were bumps along the way that I had to to catch up on, and even now I'm catching up on a lot of repertoire, and so it's been fun.
So as you're learning as a young person, first of all, I know you had like a synthesizer. You didn't even have a piano for a lot of your childhood. But as you're learning pieces, then you're listening to them. You're listening to recordings. You're seeing concerts, and you're translating that to the piano. You're not at that point. You're not picking up Clementi sonata or anything like that and learning it, by the page.
Not really. Yeah, I guess it would be sort of like if I knew how the melody went, and then I would sort of be able to play it, and then just from repetitive practicing. But the synthesizer was when I was first starting out, and it lit up and it had all those songs pre-recorded. And I think that was quite nice because like when you're bored, you just press the playback button and you start jamming. As a as a 7-year-old, as an 8-year-old, like the Titanic song. I love that. Things like that. And from there, Juilliard was such a great resource for me because you could practice at Juilliard. And so from there, it was no longer a question of getting a better piano, but I could just go to Juilliard and practice on one of their hundreds of Steinway Grands, which was quite amazing, and utilize that for most of my time. But still, when you go back home, when you have school, it's hard. So the Long Long Foundation actually found out about that and gifted me a brand new upright Steinway when I was, I believe, 16 years old. So that was very helpful, especially in the push towards conservatory auditions, college applications, everything like that.
That's wonderful. And that's still the piano you have.
Yes, it's still the one that's there, and I go back and practice on it when I'm in New York.
So basically, you're studying music, but at Harvard, you are studying economics too. Can
Yes.
you talk about how you balance those various aspects of growing up?
You don't. I think you sort of do what you can. I think there's this Chinese saying, it's like tearing down the Western wall to build the Eastern wall. I was kind of doing a little bit of that, like if I was in piano mode, I would just drop everything related to academics, and then vice versa when, all the important projects and finals and midterms come along. So it was hard, a lot of uh nights staying up, a lot of, cramming. My sleep schedule before was kind of crazy. I would like after classes, I would take a nap maybe till about 10 p.m. and then so like 5 to 10, and then from there practice up until about 4 a.m., 5 a.m., something like that. Do P sets and then start classes again. So that
Well,
was
you
a,
don't
a
really
big.
need sleep until you're in your 40s anyway.
Oh, I need sleep now for sure. I don't know how I did it before, but it's interesting because I love practicing at night, and there's something different about just practicing when everybody's gone to sleep. Everything's quiet, and then the birds chirping are kind of your alarm to move on to something else. So yeah,
So you've graduated now, I assume.
yes.
How has those dual degrees do those continue to serve you? Are you, looking at, different directions or variations of being a solo pianist. Can you talk about that?
If all goes well, economics doesn't have to serve as my primary career. Uh, of course, if I need to find a way to make money to make a roof over my head, Goldman sounds like a great option. But for right now, I think it's just about having a larger understanding of the way the world works, you know, in terms of, when somebody says we want a weak United States dollar, what does that mean for, countries like Japan, which tie their currencies to the United States? Things like that, I think it kind of gives you a bigger perspective of what's happening in the world, especially when music is so micro. This is delving a deep dive into one piece by the specific composer in a particular time period, and you're really just spending, months and months or years and years on these pieces. And so it's great to kind of resurface from the dive every once in a while and take a look around and see, what's going on in the world, and how does that inform who you are as a modern artist? Because if you're not really influenced or trying to inspire the modern world. You're just kind of doing historical recreation in a sense. So, yeah.
Well, and one of the things that strikes me about you is your ability to kind of convey the emotion behind the piece as you're performing, but also make it relatable. And you're 25 years old, being able to speak about the music. I mean, I would think you may be like in your 30s or even later. It's pretty incredible. Can you talk about, how you developed that skill, why you developed that skill? How do audiences respond to it? And why is that important for performers today?
I don't think I really it's a consciously developed skill. I think it's just for me, I've felt so impacted by specific moments in other pieces of art, whether it be media, a visual art or performative arts. And so for me, I think I really tried to distill what the core essence of those moments, which are so special to me, are. And so, for instance, I think one thing that's really interesting about music is the fact that, in a sense, you can sort of time travel. I don't know if you've ever felt this, but one of your favorite songs, if it comes on for me, I automatically think of like, oh, this was when I was doing this. I had to listen to the song for the first time, or I was chilling with my friends at a party, and then this song was playing. So it's quite interesting to have those kind of experiences be locked through certain auditory patterns. I think the same thing with art. I think there's certain types of colors for me that stand out, and I think this ties in with like Scravin and synesthesia and like the way colors have meanings for different people. But I think it's just taking all of these things in and trying to see that, you know, empathize with as much as possible, and then understand the feeling of being connected to a piece of art, and then trying to recreate that in my own performances.
And you talk about you're not perfecting the piece. That's not something that interests you. And you want the audience to feel the emotion, feel basically the story behind the music. Can you expand on that?
It's interesting how we've come to a time in an age of recording. And so kind of the recording tracks are seen as kind of the perfect products, whether it be, albums, which are, carefully produced, or even like across spectrums, classical albums, rock albums, hip hop albums, country albums. There's a level of editing that goes into it nowadays. I think some of my best or favorite recordings of songs are the live ones, because you can really feel the energy behind it. The artists sometimes do things that are not part of the main song. They might use some exclamations, whatever, things that add to the song. And I think that's really special when you have a moment that that this was just in that time for that audience and not for anybody else. And of course, people can view it through, recordings and stuff, but I think making that performance special each and every time is something that's very important to me. And if that's the goal, perfection is not, because that would mean that each and every performance would be the same once I achieve perfection.
You were a singer in a choir.
Yes.
And to me, like when I see your piano playing, I don't know how much you incorporated that into your actual of what you do now, but it that's clear to me, like that, because as a singer, like your body is your instrument,
Yes.
and really no other instrumentalists, maybe aside from conductors or something, but really the orchestra is our instrument, could say that. Can you talk about how that influences your just your general musicianship, or your general existence, I would say?
Sure. I think the fact that everything, the only instrument that we carry all the time is our own voice, and that's, quite unique in and of itself. And I think because of that, all music stems from the voice. And because that's the first instrument that we used, even in hunter-gatherer times, in rituals, there was music, and, it was drums and, and our voices, and that's about it. And I think it's really interesting to see how voices and, the languages and cultures of different voices have shaped the music of those places. Italian music is a lot more legato because the language is more legato. I think it's quite interesting to see things like, the more consonants in German music, and how you have to play that through Beethoven concertos, Brahms sonatas, even though, the it's not really being sung, but you're singing it with your heart. So you might as well. you know?
I heard you somewhere say a Mozart concerto makes you nervous. Can you talk about, and the same thing
Sure.
is like the Rite of Spring by Stravinsky makes me nervous. Mozart, I can see, but as a performer, as an instrumentalist, how that makes you nervous. But as a conductor, for me, it's not so like Stravinsky. Can you maybe talk about the difference in preparation, or kind of mental state you have to enter between something like a Mozart or a Beethoven or a Brahms or even a Rachmaninoff concerto? Is there a gradient? Does one lead to the other? Can one jump between all of those major composers back and forth willy-nilly? Can you maybe just talk a little bit about your approach to those different composers?
Sure. I think, yes, every composer is different, and so you have to play them differently. You cannot produce the same kind of average sound quality in Mozart as you do in Rachmaninoff or Liszt. But the describing of human experience is the same. And so, the despair in Mozart's Requiem, I don't think is very different from the anguish that Beethoven feels after losing his hearing. So in something like Appassionata, or, the despair that Rachmaninoff feels after the failure of his first concerto in writing Rock 2. I think these were all struggles that these composers have gone through, and they're, quite similar in some ways and quite different in other ways, in the fact that they're just born in different time periods, had different types of culture around them. And so I think it's important for me, at least, to, in approaching these composers, understand the time period in which they lived in, the general thought in which they lived in. I think in the 1700s, we were still thinking or debating whether or not the sun revolves around us or not. Things like this. It's quite interesting to think about. Oh, this is what composers in that time were debating about. And I think that all kind of helps you in creating an image, whether it's the most accurate or not, of the composer. And then you kind of understand how he's reacting to things in his life, and then how those things might have been written down in the pieces that he wrote in that time period.
I know that you just worked with a living composer, I think, in Lansing. Can you talk about how you balance kind of the standard sonatas, concerti with living composers and any kind of relationships you've developed around that?
I think one of the things that has been on decline in classical music is the kind of celebration of more modern pieces, and in that vein, maybe the subgenre of composer pianists. You can see, like in Rachmaninoff, for instance, he's performing, Chopin's work, and he's improvising all over the second sonata, and then, he's adding works of his own. You see that, with Liszt, who was very famous with like introducing the recitals like series or like format to the audience, which he would play, a couple snippets of Beethoven, Mozart, and then he would play his own stuff. And so I think continuing the canon of like playing new stuff and the things that, I really support and I think are great music, I think it's quite important. And so that's something I want to continue to do and I'm looking to do. And I think that's one of the reasons I still have, one piece from the jazz canon, I think, in all of my recitals, just to show that it's not only the old pieces that I'm looking to play.
And for the jazz canon, I know you have an amazing recording of the Concerto in F by Gershwin, and you play some Art Tatum along with some other jazz pieces. Are those pieces that you're basically transcribing, or you're kind of creating the piece in your head when you play those in your recitals? Or is that something that you kind of seek out, like what kind, like Gershwin, for instance, like what kind of classical composer has jazz pieces that you could perform?
It's a little of both. I think there's, like everybody would love to play Summer Samba if they had the fingers to play Summer Samba, but everybody's not Oscar Peterson. So we could dream. But I think it's just about finding pieces that connect with me no matter, what genre it is. And so I think, T for Two is something that I loved since, I was in pre-college, and I was waiting for the day like my technique got good enough so I could play this piece. And it's the same with like Rhapsody in Blue. Like when I learned that, that was like a monumental moment for me because I always loved that piece. And so it's just finding about like, there's some Cecil Savant pieces that I would love to transcribe. Oh, I've transcribed, but would love to play. There's a bunch of Keith Jarrett I would love to explore.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm also, I'm putting one on my next season's program. Stuff like this. I think it's just for me to discover more about myself. For instance, harmonic progressions, 2-5-1 in jazz. Rachmaninoff uses a lot of 2-5-1 as well. So, it's not really different to me to play something by Bach or something by Keith Jarrett, who, played all well-tempered clavier, or Buddy Plow,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
has, Buddy on Bach. It's just people taking inspiration from old ancient legends and then carrying it forward. That's the same thing with, Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini. That's the same as
Yes.
Errol Garner's, Chopin changes. It's it's really no different to me.
When you think about especially later Rachmaninoff, after he was in the States for a while, it's basically so much jazz. Even like later Beethoven, the more he kind of gets into his own head, the more it sounds like modern music, which is
Sure.
jazz.
And even
Can you?
like that one, I guess you're not supposed to play it like jazz, but because we live in a time where jazz has already been created, it kind of influences the canon backwards in a sense because
Mhm.
we cannot unhear the swing in the 111.
Mhm.
So it's quite interesting.
Can you talk about maybe consciously or subconsciously as a performer using what's come after composers to influence your performances of them? For example, like playing Mozart, Leopold Mozart, his father would have kind of had a violin method, that kind of told people how to play based on the practice of the time. And obviously, there are historically informed performance organizations that play like that. But in general, we've transformed probably
Yes.
what the sound of these composers over hundreds of years. How much of today should we be injecting into the music of the past?
I think you inject all of it. I think because you're playing in the present, you have to play for the present. I think it's kind of, in a sense, like nobody knows really what Jesus looks like. Nobody knows really the complete Quran that Muhammad wrote down. Nobody knows really what Beethoven sounded like when he was playing these pieces. And so when you don't know, you try to have the most educated guess possible. And then from there, it's really just inspiration. And I think especially for music, you can take as much liberty as possible. I think what's really quite interesting for me is that, if you do everything that's on the page, like very literally, it's a bad performance. It's a bad performance of that piece. Like if you do the crescendo like at the exact time he does it, for very consistent, it's pretty boring. It's when you kind of use those directions as a kind of inspiration or just as guidance for what you want to do that's when the piece really comes to life. And so, you can hear it also when you hear like Rachmaninoff play his pieces recorded. He doesn't put subito piano in some of the places he does subito piano. He does not put ritardando in some of the places he does ritardando. And so I think there's often I think a false equation between being as correct to the score as possible and having the most historically accurate representation of the pieces. Because I would think like a historical representation would just be like if you're playing Chopin, you would have to play it in a salon. You know, you can't play it in a large concert hall. Something like that. You would play with candles and all gut strings and the like, and yeah, there you go. But I think if you're subscribing to the fact that even the piano sounds different now because it's a piano and not a pianoforte, then I mean, how much conforming do you want us to do?
You talk about how you, as a kid, you struggled with multiple allergies. And,
Yes.
and aside from, of course, finding the hours of the day to sleep, can you talk about how important is health for musicians? Like, do you have any routines that, allow you to kind of stay as a kind of the top level of your performance game?
Honestly, I've only been able to kind of pay attention to my health for like the last 3 months, I would say. So this is still a discovery process for me. But I would say, I did take like a class on sleep at Harvard, and I understand like the importance of sleep. So I try to get 8 hours every day, no matter what. Before it would be like, oh, I need to practice these extra 3 hours before I sleep. Now it's like, no, I'm gonna go to. It doesn't matter what I play like tomorrow. Uh, I think also the fact that now I swim every day. I do these types of things, and it's very like a minuscule. If you wanted to measure it, it doesn't feel like a big increase, but I would just say having like an overall healthier lifestyle is just like you have more energy, you do things. And so I think it's actually quite a big delta. In fact, even though it doesn't seem like too much, it's like, I go for an hour every day, or I decide to have salad instead of fried chicken for dinner. Or like, for instance, I discovered like I love drinks and like sugary drinks. So this is from Trader Joe's, tastes amazing, and it's like 35 calories. So, I mean, more power to them. I buy 20 every week. Things
Wow.
things like
And there's
that. So
apple cider vinegar in there too.
yeah, so like I think just finding the healthier alternatives of things I like for instance, protein powder. Oh, disgust. But there's this. My friend recommended Cocoa Pebbles flavored protein powder.
Wow.
So it's basically like I'm drinking chocolate milk every morning. It's things like this. I think so. I think finding things that work for you and not kind of conforming to like just you have to do it. I think once you have a reason behind it, it's actually a lot easier.
Well, thank you, Clayton. It's been a wonderful experience having a conversation with you.
Likewise.
And I look forward to hearing about your future endeavors, and I look forward to seeing you on stage soon.
Yes, can't wait to come.
Thank you for joining us on One Symphony. Thanks to Clayton Stephenson for sharing his music and performances. Thank you to the Clyburn and International Keyboard Odysseat Festival for making this episode possible. You can find more info at claytonstephenson.com. For a list of recordings played on today's show, see our show notes online. You can always find more info at onesymphony.org, including a virtual tip jar if you'd like to support the show. Please feel free to rate, review, or share the show. Until next time, thank you for being a part of the music.